All right, so let's keep talking about this hippo idea of problems that are pushing species into extinction. So H for habitat, I for invasive, P for pollution, P for population growth, specifically humans. That's where we left off at the end of the first part of the lecture. So again, human population growth, 8 to 10 billion within the next 20 to 30 years. More developed countries, 23, 24-ish% of the population, yet we consume 80% of the resources. The environmental impact we have is 20 times greater than what you see in a less developed country or a less developed citizen. So let me add that. 20 times greater impact than a less developed country person. So somebody from Guatemala impacts the environment 20 times less than each of us listening to this lecture. That is a struggle. That is a challenge. While yes, developing countries have more children, bigger populations, we in developed countries consume far more resources. So the concern is, huge concern, what happens when India becomes a developed country? There's a billion plus people in India, and if they all have the same standard of living as the United States, we don't have the resources. What about China? Same problem. The rest of the world, if they all achieve developed status, this planet will not be able to sustain that. How many more species will go extinct? The vast majority of habitat issues, because of where the population is at, is in Asia. I mean, we do have issues here. Don't downplay it and think, oh, there's no problems in the US. We have significant issues. But because there is such a big percentage of the human population in Asia, there's a large percentage of species extinction that will be happening in Asia in the next 20 to 30 years because of their population growth. So massive problems. But again, can we find those hotspots? Work to save biodiversity hotspots. That's going to be the key to trying to save diversity across this planet. Well, okay, the O for hippo is overharvesting. So what we see happening here, we overharvest species. We take too many. We deplete the fishing stocks. We deplete the populations of birds, of whatever, and we over harvest, and we don't allow the population time to rebound, to rebuild, and then we don't sustainably harvest. So this is a huge challenge. I want you guys to go back to Tragedy of the Commons. This is why so many of the ocean fishing grounds have been depleted and declined. So numbers vary depending on the source, depending upon a lot of things, but some of the numbers I've found, and I encourage you guys, look this stuff up, look into this, get more current information or more relevant information. But some of the stats I've seen, 9 out of the 15 ocean fishing grounds have been depleted. That's a big problem. Big, a big percentage of the human population depends upon the ocean for food. And if we've depleted 9 out of 15 of those grounds, how can we rebuild them? Or do we just keep depleting until they're just completely wiped out? Then what do you do for billions of people who depend upon the ocean for sources of food? So in the US, we've done this. Consider the bison. 150, 200 years ago, we slaughtered nearly every bison in this country and over harvested. And what did we kill them for? Their hides and their tongues. We left the meat to rot in the plains out west. Some people, if you look into history, some of that was also done to destroy and suppress the Native American tribes because that was a major food source for them. Passenger pigeon, gone because we over harvested. So there's a thing here I want to talk about briefly and show you guys how this works and the problem with it. It's called the Extinction Vortex. All right, so imagine a swirling drain. And I'll see if I can draw it. It's probably not going to look real good here. But imagine this drain. And or a funnel cloud is probably a better example. Okay, so what happens here is a species, and I'm just going to call it species A, has a high value to it. Ooh, this is worth a lot of money. At the beginning, it may have a high population. And you go, okay, no big deal. We can harvest a bunch of these things, and it's not a big deal because there's plenty of them out there. So we start harvesting. We're meeting a market demand, supplying a need. People are happy because they can buy it. And we harvest it because we can make money off of it. But then if we start over-harvesting, the population starts to go down. So as the population goes down, the price goes up. Rare commodities are worth more money. That provides incentive. Keep harvesting because you're making more money. Population continues to go down, which means there's fewer, which means now they're worth even more, so there's more incentive to keep harvesting. And this vortex happens to the point where the population is almost extinct. Now there's a huge value on this endangered animal because there's only 200 left in the world and I have to have one. So it incentivizes people to keep over-harvesting and pushing species into extinction. Now the problem is, or the challenge, most of these populations we're talking about tend to be in less developed countries. The market, more developed countries. People with the money to pay for these things. So it's a double-pronged problem. Can you convince the people in less developed countries not to overharvest? Can you prevent people in more developed countries from paying for these things? Can we ban the ivory trade? Can we ban importation of endangered animals? That's part of what that CITES organization does. We talked about that earlier in the semester, and we'll get into those guys again. But this creates a huge, huge problem and pushes species into extinction. So, how do we deal with it? Well, we try to find ways to manage it. So, endangered species management. Hunting fishing laws were enacted in the 1890s. Most states had them in place at that point. And they took this pragmatic approach where they said, all right, let's figure out which species need protection. Let's find ways to try to make sure we don't overharvest. Let's control this. Let's regulate this. Let's ensure the survival of those species for future generations. Sustainable management. So, back in the 1930s, the deer herd in Illinois was almost extinct. You can believe that. 1930s, it was rare to see a white-tailed deer in the state of Illinois. If you have any grandparents or great-grandparents that were old enough, alive in the 30s and even into the early 40s, who remember this, ask them about it. Say, what was it like if somebody hunted and got a deer? It was this huge, exciting thing because the herd was decimated. It was almost gone. Proper management, controlling the seasons, regulating permits, DNR doing management practices brought that herd back up, brought it back, and enabled us to have the luxury of hunting today and in a certain degree, the overabundance of deer in the state of Illinois because we don't hunt enough. We don't have natural predators, so we now need to try to remove those deer ourselves. So there's lots of different ways to manage endangered species. Sometimes you don't hunt at all. You don't collect. You protect. A lot of that depends upon the criteria or the tag associated with the species. So when we talk about tags, these go along with the Endangered Species Act. And there's different terminologies based on if it's a federal law, like Endangered Species Act is a federal law versus international law. There's some different classifications there. We're focusing on US-based laws. So we're going to focus on these three terms or tags for species. So if something is classified as endangered, that species is in pretty much imminent danger of extinction. It could go extinct in the next generation or two of the species, not human generation or two, the species generation or two. Oh, supposed to be a space there. All right. If the species is classified as threatened, it's likely to become endangered in the near future because the population's going down. There may not be enough members available to, to maintain a viable population or to rebuild it, or there's too many factors going against it, and it may be endangered in the next couple of generations for the species. If a species is listed as vulnerable, you're sometimes classified as naturally rare or have been locally depleted. So maybe your population in the state of Illinois is doing okay, but in Sangamon County, you may not have any members of your population there. Okay, so again, it could be locally a problem, but in the state, you're okay. I'm going to pop up a screen here, and then I got to expand what the recorder's getting. But I want you guys just check out what's going on in Illinois here. So here is the Department of Natural Resources. Let me pause this. Sorry about that. I can't expand the screen while recording, so I have to pause it, pull the window that's recorded, open larger to then show you guys the bigger screen here. Anyway, here's Department of Natural Resources, Illinois Department of Natural Resources, Endangered Species Protection Board. You can just Google this. It'll take you to this site, and then you can look at list of endangered and threatened species in Illinois by county. You can do it by just the whole state. What's going on with endangered species here? So what I always find interesting, pop open this. Here's what's going on per county. And they list it out, how many total species. And they tell you, when were they last seen in the state, what's the status. LE is endangered, LT is threatened. They tend not to do vulnerable here. So let's just zoom down, just do Sangamon County, since that's where the school's at. But I'd encourage you guys, look at your county. If you're not in Sangamon, you're in Menard or Cass or Macoupin or whichever county you guys might live in, check out your county. What's in your backyard? Sometimes it's kind of shocking to go, wow, I didn't realize these things were endangered. I may not have even realized they were in my own county. Could be in your backyard or in the neighboring neighborhood park. But B, these things are possibly going to be extinct in the next few years or a couple decades. So, okay, so here's Sangamon. All right, so we start going through the list. We have 18 species that are either endangered or threatened in Sangamon County. So you run through the list, and some of these things you may say, I have no idea what these things are. Others, you go, oh, wow, there's a owl, there's a smooth soft-shelled turtle, there's a shrike, it's a type of bird, bittern is a bird, Kirtland snake, there's some flowers in here, some more birds. Oh, there's a ground squirrel, really, a box turtle, chickweed, etc. So these are things in Sangamon County that should be here in greater numbers, but unfortunately, their populations are either threatened or they're endangered, meaning these will probably be gone in our lifetimes if we don't do something about it in Sangamon County. So the goal with all this is trying to figure out, how do we manage these species? How do we protect them? And what actions can we do to try to ensure the survival of these species? Okay, so I'm going to pause it here, and then the next lecture we'll go through the plan and how you do these plans for protecting endangered species.